As I was saying before, this is all coming from the same place. The establishment, which has invested its hopes in Kamala Harris, the national security establishment, what is colloquially or crudely referred to as the deep state, is getting increasingly desperate, worried. It can no longer control the flow of information as it did before. The propaganda model that Ed Herman laid out with Noam Chomsky in The Manufacturing of Consent, and before that, Michael Parenti in inventing, what was it?
Reality.
Inventing reality, is cracking. It's cracking. It was kind of a propaganda model where corporations could, create media networks and convince the public that there was nothing wrong, and to suppress, the natural impulse of the public to protest, to rebel, to demand progressive change. And that's cracking as the mainstream media is just discredited across the board, losing viewership, readership. The Washington Post, which smeared us in the sleaziest, most bogus way possible, they've lost 50% of their readership in the past 3 years. And so
CNN has money troubles.
Yeah, they have money troubles. And so they're targeting influencers, which is where a lot of people are going. And you have a lot of young men in particular who feel alienated and left out, who are increasingly interested with the outside world and with geopolitics, and they're looking for answers. And so CNN is running a special targeting someone who actually is influential in shaping opinion in alternative media, someone who's really figured out the Twitter algorithm. They're running an attack piece on Jackson Hinkle. And I think it's part of this same initiative that we're seeing.
Next Sunday on The Whole Story, how does a Bernie bro become a pro-Trump, pro-Putin social media superstar?
I've been to Russia. I've been to China. Their major cities are much nicer.
Donnie O'Sullivan meets the terminally online young men of the disillusioned left.
MAGA communism. People watching CNN are going to say, you're crazy.
And star influencers trying to stop the spread of misinformation.
All 5 of the people watching CNN.
Right-wing rabbit hole.
The Whole Story with...
Well, let's watch that part again.
Trying to stop the spread of misinformation.
I want to make sure that they're not falling down this right-wing rabbit hole.
The Whole Story with Anderson Cooper. Next Sunday at 8 on...
So it's called Misinfo Nation, The Lost Left. And it's targeting Jackson Hinkle and MAGA communism. And then you have... watch this again.
With misinformation.
I want to make sure that they're not falling down this right-wing rabbit hole.
And it's, that's Hassan Piker, the nephew of Cenk Uygur. And he's the good left-wing influencer who is credentialed at the Democratic National Convention. And there's Donnie O'Sullivan, who is the CNN sort of counter disinformation reporter who's always hitting any counter hegemonic media personality, people that most Americans have never heard of. One thing he will never do, ever, is attack elite misinformation or Israeli disinformation or the Pentagon's disinformation. He's always punching down, and he's a complete tool for the national security state. He's working hand in glove with them. They set the agenda, just like Brandy Zabroni at NBC and all these other fake counter disinformation reporters who suddenly just cropped up out of nowhere during the Trump era when the national security elite got frightened of populism. So they're targeting Jackson Hinkle. Hassan Piker is sort of the snitch who's posing as the good leftist. And it's very revealing just to see that preview and to see this, how it's coming out at this particular time. After FBI agents show up at Scott Ritter's door after this indictment, somebody's freaking out. And I actually don't think their freak out is justified. I think their budget is just too high and they're trying to justify their bureaucratic priorities.
I mean, to a degree, I think from their perspective, their freak out is justified because, as you say, they've lost control of the narrative and it's not going back. I mean, they can make that comment, oh, CNN viewers are going to think you're crazy. Well, not many people are watching CNN and buying it anymore. Actually, more people are watching Jackson Hinkle. And that's what they're so upset about, is that Jackson is very effective. For example, just recently, he was in Venezuela during the most recent election there when there was definitely an attempt by the U.S. to overthrow the government once again. And Jackson was breaking through big time on social media in a way that the influencers that usually go down there could only dream of. And that's why they hate Jackson. That's why they can't, and also because they can't put him in a box. They can't just say, oh, he's a weird loony leftist who like won't catch on to the country because he cares about like trans rights more than he cares about just like things that most people are dealing with in their daily life. Like he doesn't fall into that category of leftist that you can just write off because most people don't like them. He's actually charismatic and articulate. And if a lot of these discontent men that you're speaking of hear him, they might actually say like, wait, this guy has a point. It's kind of like a competition between the Jackson model of the future or the Nick Fuentes model.
Exactly.
And so they really hate those guys because they reach a large audience and they can't be shut up. They can't be controlled. Well, Nick's a conversation for another time, but I think that he poses a similar threat, and that's why there is this extreme overreaction to them in some instances. But Jackson, you know, congratulations that CNN invested all that time and money into smearing you, and keep it up, because what they want is for us to be afraid to speak. They want us to think that we're doing something wrong by traveling to other countries and meeting people and hearing what life is like there. And the reality is that the global order, like you said at the beginning of this show, the neoliberal, the liberal order has failed the world in terms of countries, and its liberalism at home has failed this country. Americans are very fed up with what has been going on here for decades. It's clear that what we've been doing isn't working. You know, people, whether it's the fact that our economy is like completely fake, or that people are like under 40 and 30 are just on drugs, incapable of finding mates and reproducing. It's a miserable experience really in this country right now for a lot of people. And so that has to change. And these people don't want it to change because they've been benefiting just sitting in their air-conditioned studios and CNN and, you know, making us all hate each other, saying like these people are racist and these people are pro-Russia, whatever. It's not working anymore, and it's not going to work. 10 years from now, I don't even think CNN will be around.
Just to confirm something that was mentioned, I'm not going to be testifying at the Uhuru trial.
Okay. I heard that mentioned publicly, so I thought I could say it.
No, it's fine. Like the defense proposed me as an expert witness. I'm not totally up on the sequence. I think initially the government was going to say something about alleged Russian interference in 2016. So I was going to be brought in to discuss that. And okay, this could be like confirmation bias on my part. But if I have it correctly, and I'll correct this if I'm wrong, after I was introduced as a potential witness, I believe the government withdrew their effort to discuss 2016. I think so. But then also, and then they submitted a brief saying why am I qualified to be an expert witness. And I got to say, they made a pretty good case. Like they pointed out I have no peer-reviewed work. I'm not a professor, all these things, you know, and I was reading this. I was like, oh, you know, fair enough. It's hard to argue that. So, but I don't think the Uhuru defendants need me to make their case that they're being, as you guys discussed, they're being persecuted for political speech, you know, for basically espousing views they've held and expressed their entire lives. In the case of the chairman, he's in his 80s. He's, you know, his views have never changed. So the government is basically trying to criminalize him for having the same views while still accepting, as Max pointed out, a relatively small amount of money from a Russian national. And, I don't think that's criminal.
It's tough when you think about like an American jury. Are they just going to be so scared because they're hearing Russia, 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 and like, can they even be swayed by a logical argument? It's tough because I give credit to the defense for going with this case, because there's obviously so much manipulation that Americans have experienced over the last few years that really, you know, play into the government's hand. It's sad.
I pointed to there were a lot of bogus terror trials, but if people don't remember, the Samuel Arian and Holy Land 5 trials initially were thrown out by juries, and the government had to go jury shopping and go get new trials. And one of those trials, the Holy Land 5 trial, was in Dallas before a conservative jury. and like one juror actually was not on board, but the rest of the jurors wanted to throw it out. And the same with the Samuel Arian trial in Tampa, where he was accused of being the U.S. leader of Palestinian Islamic Jihad. And the defense got up and said, in their final argument, our closing argument is the Constitution. Our closing argument is the First Amendment, and that's all they said. And every member of the jury except one voted to acquit him. But because it was a hung jury, the government went and shopped for another jury until they got the one they wanted, until they started, then they tried to get him in a perjury trap. The point is, even conservative juries might not go for this. The American people are less malleable than the government thinks. So we'll see what happens.
One thing about the Sami al-Aryan case, if I remember correctly, I believe, was it WikiLeaks that exposed that actually the government was in contact with Israeli officials about the Sami al-Aryan trial, and that Israel provided some of the so-called evidence against them?
Big time.
Yeah.
Big time. Both of those cases were huge examples of Israeli meddling and interference in the U.S. justice system and U.S. politics to create the specter of these terror cells operating in the U.S. when there was no such thing taking place. The Holy Land Five was an aid organization that was being prosecuted and persecuted for sending money to NGOs in the Gaza Strip. And the argument was, they're funding Hamas. These are NGOs that were also getting money from the Red Cross and USAID. It was the phoniest trial. There's a good book by Miko Peled, our friend, called Injustice, about the Holy Land Five. And there's a documentary about the persecution of Samuel Arian. Can I just respond to Aaron real quick? So in both cases, the Mossad sent an agent to the Holy Land Five trial, and they had to clear the entire gallery so that his identity wouldn't be revealed. And he was presented as an expert. And the Israelis brought the families of suicide bombing victims to cry in Samuel Arian's trial and appear outside to influence the media, even though he himself was not involved in any suicide bombing. So
it's kind of similar to what they're doing with Sarah Wilkinson in the UK now, where they raided her, threw her mother's ashes on the ground and all that, and then demanded information about where the wells that she's built, like raised money to build wells in Gaza. That was like the big focus of their questioning. And they were even asking her where the wells were built. It's like charity work that is now criminal.
Yeah. You can't build a well in Gaza. You can only build a gigantic crater with a 2,000-pound US bomb.